Good afternoon, my name is Hola Tamanova, and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's day 569 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and now we will be talking about the summary of the meeting between Putin and Kim Jong-un. Joining us in our studio is Nataliya Plaksiienko-Butyrska, expert on East Asia, Master of International Relations. Good afternoon, Miss Nataliya. Good afternoon, Miss Nataliya. So what this meeting may mean for us as Ukraine? Well, the talks that they were going on within the last year, we were hearing from the American intelligence, from South Korean intelligence about the interest of Russia in the arms that they would be capable to obtain from North Korea. So those talks now get practical. There were a number of closed meetings, but information has surfaced from the head of our main Directorate of Intelligence that 1.5 months ago, the first shells from North Korea emerged in the front lines. Before that, there were negotiations about the possibility of handover of certain amounts of shells to Wagner Group. That was something that could be noticed during the previous year. So those talks, those agreements now materialized to a certain extent, and now it's an open question, because for us we understand that it will allow Russia to continue, at least for some time, battle operations in the front lines and to make the war longer, because when there are talks about the weapons, they remind of huge reserves of ammunition in North Korea, because the country is in war conditions since 50s of the previous century. They were accumulating all those weapons because they continue waging war all the time, and artillery was a type of deterrence for North Korea before they were able to get the nuclear weapons. So we have information that such reserves may be immense, but since it's a closed country where no one has access to, then what is the amount of those reserves and how ready are they to hand over the ammunition to Russia, and in what amounts? Everything is unknown. And since there was no announcement of any signed documents, any agreements as a summary of the meeting, it means that the parties will not announce any such agreements, because here we're talking about the violation of the sanctions imposed by the United Nations Security Council, because North Korea is under such amount of sanctions that they cannot be traded with. There is very narrow number of sectors that any parties are allowed to cooperate with North Korea in, and thus Russia demonstrates its, so to say, insides, because they try to conceal their activities which contradict the documents they were signing themselves. Putin said that they remember that there are sanction restrictions they are about to comply with, but there are some prospects of cooperation, which looks quite surprising, because to find the prospects for cooperation in the airspace and aviation sectors are impossible. Well, talking about the general context, in the eve of this visit, the Western media were writing a lot that North Korea may want, in exchange for that military support of Russia, those shells. They will want in exchange the support of the military industrial complex, and the finance and natural resources is something that goes without saying. The meeting was taking place in the launch site, airspace launch site Vostochny, which evidences the interest of North Korea to airspace technologies. There was a number of visits to aviation manufacturing facilities and other industrial facilities that are involved in manufacturing of submarines and battleships. That's all of interest to North Korea because recently there was another unsuccessful attempt of the launch of the space satellite. They tried to launch their spy satellite, and the next test will be in October. And talking about the negotiations and agreements that were achieved behind the curtains, this is something that we may only reflect about. South Korea, a week or maybe a little bit more ago, deployed one submarine capable of carrying tactical nuclear weapons. It's a modernized submarine of the 50s specimen. It's a modernized Soviet-era submarine. So we see that those technologies are of interest to North Korea, and the prospects of such cooperation are way broader than any supplies of the ammunition for Russia by North Korea. And any such cooperation will be in violation of the resolution of Security Council of the United Nations. And in this context, the country that exercises the terror in Ukraine, the country that first signs the resolutions and then violates them in different ways in compliance with them, that's a big question whether such country is entitled to a place in the Security Council. And another problem is the problem for the region in general. If any such technologies would be handed over, if they will exchange intelligence, for example, and in case of support or in exchange for support by ammunition, Russia will assist them in launching their satellite. North Korea will be capable of spying more on other countries in the region. That will reinforce such country in any way, which creates additional tension in the Korean Peninsula. It gives additional opportunities to improve their missile program and blackmail the whole world. Because we see that this country is absolutely unwilling to enter any negotiations aimed at denuclearization of its capabilities. And on contrary, they're just reinforcing their capabilities. So the accents are shifting, and it creates problems for the whole world. Miss Natalia, I've seen that a lot of countries have different opinions talking about the supplies of ammunition. They say we know that the North Korea was taking part in battle operations back in the year 1953, and many experts have doubts about the quality of that ammunition. So what is your opinion? Do you really think that North Korea will hand over significant amount of ammunition, or are you inclined to think that there will be some huge amount of supplies because North Korea needs them as well? Well, you know, it's very difficult to predict now what will be the amount of that North Korea will be able to hand over to Russia. It depends on what they're getting in exchange. You know, in the view of demand of Russia, North Korea will set the relevant price tag. If it will be a small quantity, or if it will be in exchange for food, for example, that means the amount of ammunition will be not so substantial. You know, previously when North Korea was demonstrating its capabilities, they demonstrated the poor quality of ammunition. Not all of the ammunition exploded at impact, for example, but on the other hand, we should not exaggerate the factor of North Korea from the perspective of our situation, but at the same time let's not underestimate them, because even if it's a poor quality ammunition shells, if they get to our front lines, they will create problems and support Russia at least for some period. They will support their replenishment of resources. And in our case, we're talking about the casualties, about prolongation of war, and we cannot help but pay attention to this issue. Well, we've all heard about the reaction of the United States. They said they will reinforce the sanctions over Russia and North Korea in case of such supplies. So the question is whether there is space to reinforce the sanctions, because we know that they are under sanctions for a lot of years. And in case of Russia, may such cooperation result in new package of sanctions? Well, talking about the sanctions on North Korea, they're under such pressure that they cannot be intimidated, because from the very moment of beginning of its existence, they have very low quality of life, and they confess the principle of self-sustainability. They kind of live in a bubble, and so any additional sanctions will not result in any changes in North Korea. The sanctions that were supported by all the countries imposed by the Security Council of the United Nations, they were supported by China and Russia as well. And in case of any trade or smuggling, some smuggling trade, it was of clandestine nature. Some of those ships, they were just reloading Russian oil or North Korean coal. Well, such cases happened. They were loaded in the sea from one ship to another with communications off. But upon the results of the meeting, Lavrov stated that they are not going to support any sanctions against North Korea together with the Chinese partners, well, which was obvious. And after the year 2017, they were blocking any attempts of the United States and the Asian countries to somehow adopt a bigger sanction package in response to further weapon tests, because previous year, in contradiction to all the prohibitions, North Korea tested more than 15 missiles last year and about 30 this year. On top of that, during the launch of the satellite, they used the ballistic technologies, which is prohibited. And Putin proposed their support in this area. I think that now China will just block any sanctions, and Russia will just violate the sanctions in violation of the obligations they've undertaken themselves. Talking about the United States and South Korea, they said that in case of any cooperation and transfer of technologies or trade of ammunition, they will apply sanctions on their end. And from the point of view of North Korea, it may be in vain, because they cannot be intimidated even more, but it will be efficient in case of Russia. On top of that, Russia, from one hand, they try to solve their problems by reinforcing their diplomatic weight and to exercise certain influence over the countries of East Asia. But in case of this transfer, they will seriously damage their relations with South Korea, for example, because if Japan is harder in their relations to Russia, we see how hard is their response by applying. They don't only support the sanction packages, but they impose their own sanction packages. They amend their legislation to increase the support of Ukraine. And in case of South Korea, they gradually reinforced this support, and they offered significant funding for support of Ukraine, for Ukrainian recovery, but they're still cautious in terms of supply of weapons. given the fact that they're seventh largest weapons exporter in the world. They have a lot of modern types of weapons which complies with NATO standards, which is very up to date, and it could come in very handy in our front lines. But the factor of North Korea and intimidation by Putin, who said that if the weapons are going from South Korea to Ukraine, we are about to transfer the technologies to North Korea. And this is a serious deterrent factor for South Korea. So it's a blackmailing, of course, yes, it's a blackmailing. So in case such cooperation will be initiated, South Korea will have more space for maneuver, for reiterating their stance or taking more active stance. Ms. Natalia, you've touched upon the topic of China. We know that China does nothing without any benefits or advantages for themselves. So to what extent such cooperation between North Korea and Russia is of advantage to China in case Russia can potentially transfer any technologies to Kim Jong-un? Well, in fact, China is an invisible party behind all those negotiations. They're the most influential and powerful country, and both North Korea and Russia depend on China. And those negotiations taking place, they are happening with full understanding and consent of China. The first meetings that have taken place between Russian top officials, first of all Shoigu and other officials accompanying him, so such meetings were taking place back in July during the celebration, in July during the celebration of the end of Korean War. The next visit was during the anniversary, 75th anniversary of creation of North Korean People's Republic, and those negotiations that were taking place, they are of interest to China because it cannot be happening the other way. And during those meetings between the delegations of Russia and North Korea, there were people spotted who are representatives of Chinese government. So in any case, any information about such transfers is something China is aware of, and we'll see to what extent China will allow development of this cooperation. North Korea depends on the trade with China, on its diplomatic support, but on the other hand, they demonstrate certain independence and they live in a kind of cocoon. Still, the influence of China is very substantial, and to them it's important how the situation in their region develops. Before the Russian aggression, both China and Russia were trying not to provide additional technologies to North Korea, not to provide them with additional capabilities, so it could create more problems in the region. Now we'll see to what extent is China ready to allow the expansion of military capabilities of North Korea. On one hand, it's important and maybe advantageous for them to demonstrate this cooperation, maybe even to reinforce North Korea, because China perceives the cooperation of South Korea, United States and Japan in context of their deterrence of expansion of Western world. And now they see it as the threat to their national security, and creation of this triangle, Russia, China, North Korea, is maybe obvious as an attempt to illustrate to the United States such a capability to cooperate. And on top of that, Shoigu, during his visit, mentioned that North Korea will be invited for military training. It will be the first time they participate in any exercises like that. And China did not deny it. So this type of geopolitical competition in the region, they will be there. So trade balance between Russia and North Korea is zero. Is it because there is only illegal trade, or is there potential to change this component? Well, before now the trade was very insignificant because economies of Russia and North Korea are similar, and there were very little areas where they could complement each other, like a little bit of coal and oil. There was very little match from the point of view of economy, and respectively North Korea depended on China for 70%, and within the last couple of years it was 90-95%, because they were able to procure anything from China. And on top of that, there was a very intense smuggling in the borders that helped people survive. And also North Korea back in the USSR times depended a lot on its support, and USSR extended significant amounts of money to North Korea, but after its collapse, Russia was not able to carry that burden by itself, and after this component disappeared, North Korea became more distant from Russia. And during Trump period, when there were negotiations initiated between Trump and Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea met with Xi Jinping, and if we may admit, any such consultations, they were happening with China, not with Russia. So when the negotiations with the United States failed, there were talks that Russia is not a force to reckon with, but a lot of things have changed, specifically on the background of Russian aggression. And in this case, North Korea has picked its side. Before that, they were balancing between different centers of force, like United States, China, and Russia, and they were trying to set up negotiations with the United States to receive the international subjectivity and to have the nuclear program recognized, to allow them to be a nuclear state, to lift a part of sanctions. They had hopes like that. So after that defeat, Kim Jong-un hid himself in a type of cocoon. He was living in isolation, and now that there is some tension in the air between China and the United States, he thinks he can get more from these countries. And as a result, we see significant diplomatic support by North Korea. They recognize the occupied territories, they support resolutions or the denials by Russia of other resolutions related to Ukraine. And the statements by the sister of Kim Jong-un, she's the main media mediator. So those statements about the war, they repeat the narratives promoted by Russia. So that change happened on the background of the new geopolitical realities. Thank you, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions on the floor? Good afternoon, Nataliya Yurchenko, Ukrinform. In your opinion, why Putin and Kim Jong-un decided to meet personally? What were the issues that they discussed that it was so important to meet personally, and who benefited more from that meeting? Well, they needed that meeting equally. It was happening in the Far East of Russia. It was during the economic summit of the Far East. Previously, it gathered a lot of guests like Narendra Modi, Xi Jinping, and other global leaders, and now this summit is of no interest to anybody due to the sanctions. This year there were representatives of such countries as Laos, Myanmar, Mongolia, but for example, it was vice president attending from Laos, and there were no significant achievements or negotiations during that summit. And the visit of Kim Jong-un, look, all the world is talking about it now in the context of defeats of Russia, in the context of international isolation, because Putin even was afraid to go to the summit he was invited to in India. So now he has a meeting with a person nobody wants to talk with. And the fact that these two forces can now cooperate, Russia likes this demonstration and populist steps. This is a signal to Japan, South Korea, United States that they will transfer the technologies and they will reinforce the nuclear potential of North Korea. And North Korea, in their growth of nuclear capabilities, try to target the coast of the United States. So all those signals of different nature, they were necessary both for Putin and Kim Jong-un. But talking about Kim Jong-un, the situation in the country is very complicated, because during the last 3 years the country was in full isolation with no trade whatsoever. And on top of that, the diplomats who were staying there, they were not able to rotate. The medicines were not enough, the clothing, all the basic necessities were insufficient. Many diplomatic missions, they left the country completely, and no one could enter the country for rotation because they didn't let anybody in. So they just started opening. The economic situation is different, the funding is insufficient, the natural conditions were such that the harvest that was growing was significantly damaged by the weather. And now Russia invites them. They are ready to send food, they are ready to support them with technologies, and it's a good moment, to get something when you need it real bad. And the image for the internal audience, when the leader of the country is received somewhere, someone extends a lending hand. So in your opinion, it was more of a benefit to Kim Jong-un? Yes, in terms of his image, he has more capabilities to bargain more from Russia. And I apologize, how does Putin sell this to their internal audience? The Russians, they are arrogant, they want to compete with Russia, and that there is such ambiguous partner, Well, during the meeting of the leaders, they put a lot of accents that they were fighting together against Japanese colonialists, that they fight the hegemony together. So, it was something to remind of the years 50s of the previous century, and the press represented them as the old allies who went through difficult times together. And when now United States tried to defeat Russia strategically, there is a friend who is ready to support them. Russian media, Russian propaganda, they can make a diamond out of anything. I was reading the publics by the Russians themselves. Yes, they are very arrogant, and in their private conversations there is a lot of arrogance over North Korea, because North Korea is difficult to illustrate as the country that Russians dream about as a friend, or very little Russians dream of living there or going there for recreation. Well, Ms. Natalia, the last question: should Ukraine respond in any way to this type of meetings, and if so, how? We have to reinforce our cooperation with the Western partners and with the Eastern partners as well, such as North Korea and Japan, because it may create problem for everybody it's not a direct threat to the lives of our people, no matter what will be the amount of ammunition supplied to Russia, but we also have to work on mitigation of this, minimizing of this cooperation using sanctions, using intelligence, and we have to monitor this North Korean channel. What's behind this cooperation? Won't the weapons from other countries also start flowing this channel? I don't want to talk about China, for example, right now, but some specimens from Chinese companies also end up in Russia, like non-lethal weapons. Some components are used in construction of missiles and UAVs, and we have to track this channel very closely. Well, thank you very much for finding time to join our broadcast. I'm reminding you, dear colleagues, joining us was Nataliya Plaksiienko-Butyrska, expert on East Asia, master of international relations. I want to thank you, and traditionally I want to thank our security and defense forces. Let's work together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Thank you very much. Glory to the heroes.